The third time I've posted this video, but I encourage you to watch it one more time because, as it turns out, Elizabeth Holmes was just recently sentenced to 11 years in prison for what she did involving fraud in her company back 2010, 2012, really going back all the way to 2004, Theranos. It was a scientific enterprise through which they were trying to create special techniques using the collection of tiny droplets of blood. However, it turned out that the whole thing was essentially a scam. And the reason I think this is something interesting to watch is because, as I say near the end of the video, it illustrates perfectly the slow speed of the justice system, particularly when you can avail yourself of lawyers, usually cost significant amounts of money, lawyers that will then, in large measure, stall, delay, file motions. Where is this relevant? Well, most acutely, most explicitly, in the case of our disgraced ex-president. And I continue to see comments on the channel, exasperated people who say, I've lost faith, I don't think this man will ever be brought to account, he evades responsibility, etc. I say, no, that's not true at all. First of all, while he was president, good luck with that. He was being protected by a Republican Party that in this day and age is far more interested in power than in governance, and far more interested in saying whatever it takes to get by than telling the truth. So there's no way they were going to convict him, even though I'm sure people like Liz Cheney likely regret that they let him off the hook back in the Ukraine scandal. And there were others who had the chance to convict him after he attempted to overthrow the government. One of whom would be, for example, Mitch McConnell. But when you hear Mitch McConnell today say that, hey, if Trump is nominated again, then I'll support him, having said that he's a criminal, boggles the mind. So expecting that he would be brought to account during the years when he was president is, to my understanding, completely unrealistic. So in effect, he's being pursued for his crimes since he left. And of course, he's such a genius, or such a stable genius, that he's committed more crimes since he left. One, the insurrection, which is after he's lost the presidency, and then he takes it upon himself to take highly classified records home, which is completely against the law. Right? So the point being that, effectively speaking, the law has been after him, so to speak, for a couple of years. And this is how you have to look at it. Even with the situation we have now, there's a special counsel that has been appointed, and I suspect there's a good chance, having said, that the system is slow, he'll be brought to account sooner rather than later, just from his transits and the fact that on the records matter, the evidence is pretty clear. It's a fairly easy case to prove, both on the substance of the transgression and on obstruction of justice, because on top of being, a criminal and taking the records home, he then was trying to block the government from getting the records back, which is yet another crime. So it's possible that very soon we'll see action. But if not, you have to be patient. It takes time. Hope you enjoy this video one more time. It shows you that when Saturn is going through your sign is often when you're brought to account. She was in trouble all the way back in 2014, 2015, 2016, when Saturn was actually squaring. Saturn was in Scorpio still in 2015. She's an Aquarius, she has planets in Scorpio. So it had to travel through Sagittarius, through Capricorn, and then in Aquarius is when finally a trial was set. Now she's been convicted with Saturn and Uranus in the vicinity of that sun of hers, because Uranus is squaring it from Taurus, and Saturn is conjoining it. There's no birth time, which would add more detail in terms of the houses and so forth, but clearly something in there in the totality of the planets is pointing her to the prison house because she's been put in prison. And even though I bet she won't serve 11 years, she'll probably serve less than that, but it's still significant. And I think it's a definite victory for justice. This video was initially posted in mid-September about Elizabeth Holmes, an entrepreneur who is on trial for fraudulent behavior. And at the moment, the news is reporting that she is testifying on her own behalf. But what is interesting here is the astrology of it, because you can see that her transits are pretty complicated, and since you can anticipate that the trial is likely to be over either soon or maybe at the latest into the new year, or if you look really far ahead, perhaps in the spring, and yet you can see what is happening with her planetary transits and the kind of outcome that we're likely to see. This is one chart where I would be fascinated to find a verified birth time in order to more accurately hone in on what has already happened and what is likely to transpire next. And yet, even with just her day positions, the chart for Elizabeth Holmes is quite revealing both for character and in regard to the timing of events. Given the trajectory of her journey into a fame that turned into infamy, the subject of blood seems to be critical to the story. A Capricorn Mercury with a sextile to Saturn tells us she's no dummy. This is a solid strategic thinker, and when we notice Mercury in an almost exact ninth harmonic aspect to her natal Pluto, we know the thinking is naturally deep and insightful, but that S next to the Pluto informs us that it was stationary at birth. In fact, it was dead-stopped stationary on her day of birth, which means this planet was very dominant in her makeup. And though the strengths become penetrating insight and relentless commitment to causes, the dark side of what is effectively excessive Pluto energy is obsession and paranoia, which according to the tale that is told, she began to suffer from as her company got into trouble. And to be honest, I would not be surprised to learn it was there all along, even when things were doing well. When you're looking for blood, look to Mars. And if you see it conjunct Saturn and square the Sun, you understand she wants to organize, structure, and control Saturn, blood, Mars. And because it links to Aquarius, she wants to essentially technologize it, use some kind of fancy robotic system to change, transform Mars, Saturn, and Scorpio the way things had been done with this topic up to now. All of this is great, but as it turned out, when her methods eventually came to light, her vision and ambition were far bigger than her ability to actually make it happen in a realistic way. And instead of changing her approach or going back to the drawing board, she decided instead to pretend it was working in order to keep the investors happy. If you're looking for an explanation for this behavior, you would likely find it in a Jupiter-Neptune conjunction, since nothing like Jupiter for keeping your optimism going no matter what, and Neptune for making up a story that isn't true, but sounds like it might be. And if Neptune can mean the lie on the dark side, Jupiter likes to go big, so now you have a big lie. At one point, she claimed her company had earned 100 million in a year when it was really only 100,000. Really good scientists who knew about her aims with these rapid tests she wanted to do with minimal blood to get super important data very quickly were saying it couldn't be done. She was trying to get vast amounts of data from a few droplets of blood derived from the tip of a finger. And when she was questioned or criticized, her reply was, well, that's what they always say, but then when I succeed, they'll say I changed the world. Credit to her for continuing to believe in her own vision, but it's hard to agree with her attitude that it was okay to lie, cheat, and deceive in order to get there. The origins of her company go back to as early as 2004, when she was starting to raise money for her big project, with Saturn transiting opposite her Sun, to correlate with an ambitious quest one wants to take on, and then things began to accelerate in 2010, when the 6 million she had raised in 2004 was by now 92 million, and she was getting big names like former Secretary of State George Shultz to endorse her cause. She continued rolling along for a few more years, gathering fame and notoriety as a both present-time and upcoming brilliant entrepreneur, due to become a multi-billionaire. But then the cracks began to appear as we get into the 2014-2015 period, with transiting Saturn squaring her Sun, and by the time we get into 2016 and beyond, her scam was being uncovered and her 800-employee company began to fall apart, so that by 2018 it had completely cratered and her riches had turned to mostly rags, and worse still, criminal investigations into her long-term fraud were already underway by mid-2018, and in an illustration of just how slow the legal system can be, particularly when you have access to expensive lawyers, which he did, her actual trial was only due to start by August of 2020, and due to the COVID pandemic, it actually started a full year later in this past August of 2021. Now, her astrological problem is that Saturn is ominously transiting near her Sun, even as Uranus squares it from Taurus, and this will continue the rest of this year and all of next year. Plus, Saturn and Mars are on the other end of that. In the context of being embroiled in a trial in which the evidence against you looks to be pretty strong and very hard to get around, this is very unfavorable astrology with a good number of possible alignments that can be devastating to your fortune. For example, if any of these planets have connections to her 12th house, she might find herself incarcerated for a significant period of time.